So, I'm gonna try something new here. I have an ever-growing backlog of supposed masterpieces which I've been neglecting for the past while now, and something just doesn't sit right with me knowing I've taken zero actions to chip away at it. So, I got to thinking, and making content for this channel feels new and exciting, and I thought it could act as a little bit of an incentive for me to complete some of these games if I were to go through the process of reviewing them afterwards. My list is quite immense at this point, and starting with a title which is short and sweet could be just what I need to get a move on in my progress through these games. To initiate this process, I found myself scrolling through my Steam library, and right off the bat, Furi jumped out at me. I like the sound of a cinematic boss rush, and people have been pestering me to play this game since its release in 2016. With this, there's not really any better time than the present to fulfill some near-decade-old requests, and I think it would make for a fun time to write down and consolidate my thoughts while playing through this game. So, with this in mind, let's get into it. Throughout the entire time I was playing Furi, I found that there was only one word I could use to adequately describe it. And that word is pace. This game is absolutely relentless with its boss fights and striking imagery, hitting you with an insane number of these incredibly cinematic camera perspectives and unique mechanics over its pretty short playtime. The funny thing is that when I look back and try to recall my time with Furi, it doesn't actually seem like it was that short. Every moment was memorable and visually compelling, which is all you can really ask for when playing through this boss rush style of game. So when I find myself looking back at Furi's roughly 3.5 hour runtime, I'm not thinking about how I was able to beat this game in one sitting. I'm more so thinking about how dense this title was. In order to adequately depict just how unique of a game Furi is, it will prove necessary to break it down into its more fundamental components. So, let me start by stating that there are two primary modes in which you experience this game. The first mode is the combat, which is where most of this game's primary mechanics come to the forefront. While fighting, you will be forced to adequately react to hundreds of projectiles coming your way in a somewhat timely manner, while also parrying and proceeding to slaughter every single person who gets in your way. The second and more interesting mode in my eyes is the presentation of this game. This includes the atmospheric walks that the player will take in between boss encounters, as well as the cutscenes which act as a pre-game for each fight. I have a lot to say on that second mode, as it's not quite as simple as one would initially anticipate. But for now, it makes more sense to start by breaking down the combat of Furi, as that is most likely what will draw the majority of players to this game, and it will give context into why that second mode is just so damn important. There is something funny to me about discussing this game's combat in the context of a review, as I don't have to say a word to prove to you that it's fantastic. Just look at it. Not only does it adequately mix close quarters combat with bullet hell mechanics for almost every fight, but it does so with such a cinematic flair, allowing for this game to hit far above its budgetary weight and exceed many of the standards which we place on indie titles. No concessions were made when producing the combat for this game. The bullet hell mechanics work, and while I don't play many games of this style, I found myself engaged through these segments. However, the melee combat allows this game to enter my wheelhouse a little bit more, as I've always found myself yearning for some quality parry mechanics in the games that I play. Luckily for me, the melee combat in this game is great, and throughout my time with Furi, I never once thought that it was anything less than fantastic. There's a certain push and pull that is required from games of this combat style, and this allows for each battle to feel like they're based on momentum rather than just aimlessly swinging. Sekiro and other FromSoft games are great examples of this, as when you carry that momentum, you have the ability to absolutely slaughter almost anything with ease. It's only when you slip up where things start to fall apart. Furi has a similar style of combat, and it's the reason why it feels so good to play. Every time you lose a fight, it feels like it's your fault rather than the game's, and in the end, that is all that really matters when playing this type of game. Speaking of the fights, I won't spoil the fun by stating exactly how many bosses there are in this game, but what I can say is that there are no more than a dozen, and each one not only feels distinct, but also incredibly high quality. There are no bad fights. Of course, I have my favorites, but each one brought something new to the table, and I admire all of them for that reason. For this same reason, your favorite moments from this game could be entirely different from my own, and this is absolutely the sign of a well-crafted title. Shockingly, this is all that I have to say about the combat in this game. I don't know what the general consensus is, but I wasn't able to find a mechanic that just didn't work. And while this game is obviously not perfect, I found the combat design to have no distinguishable flaws. So, now that we have done all the preliminary work in covering the combat of this game, it's time to delve into what I think truly separates Furi from other titles which could be considered as similar. When you find yourself engaging in combat as intense as Furi's for the entirety of a game's runtime, it's very possible for the player to get somewhat overwhelmed and desensitized to the adrenaline-inducing highs that these games live or die by. However, if these games give you enough breathing room to digest these battles as they come with a few contemplative segments between them, those same adrenaline-inducing peaks can hit so much harder due to their contrast with the more relaxed segments. It's a tightrope that Furi finds itself balancing really well. The cutscenes in this game are not high-octane bloodbaths, no, they're reflective. And these more melancholic moments allow for the game to reach peaks which would have otherwise been impossible. This is why the game stands out. This isn't a thrown-together boss rush with admittedly great combat. This is a curated experience which is entirely self-indulgent in the best ways possible. Furi's extravagance is only matched by the game's desire to pull you into its world, and in this sense, the game absolutely succeeds. The walk that the player takes in between each boss is a great example of this, as it's really only there to give the player a sense of world building while traveling through Furi's apocalyptic environments. This is only scratching the surface of this game's creativity too, as it continuously throws thumping music, insane perspectives, and unhinged character designs to overwhelm the player with a sense of place and self-importance when escaping into this game's world. This allows for the game to move at a fast pace without the player ever stopping to ask why they might be doing something. And my god, the music. I can't think of a single game in this style where the music sets the tone and defines every single moment of the experience. But somehow Furi did this. The visual design is also fantastic, and not only does it tie the whole package together, but it also allows for some beautiful moments throughout the game. The thing is that it seems so easy to place a finger on what Furi does differently and exceptionally well, but at the same time there's a reason that not any studio can do what the game makers have done. It takes a lot of time and effort to make a game, period, but to tie a package together which is this cohesive as a studio's debut experience is downright insane. I went into this game with tapered expectations, and this allowed me to be surprised by the quality of this title. This is partly the reason why I have been so positive in this review. However, this doesn't mean that this game is perfect. I've gone this entire video without discussing the game's story once, and this should be rather telling into how important I find it to be. The game opens up with the main character in this celestial prison, one with several layers the player will need to pass through in order to escape. The protagonist gets an advisor in the form of this man, and then you're off to kill the several wardens of this prison. This is not a bad concept for a game at all, and it's also partially for this reason why it's such a shame that the game couldn't live up to the promise of this compelling introduction. I found that the game narratively fell off the tracks over the course of my playthrough, and nearing the end of the game, I would have said that I did not care for the story at all. Of course, this is just an opinion, and many other players probably like this story. However, I think that even they would agree that it gets unnecessarily convoluted in the latter half of the game. Another issue which I had with this game was the difficulty spikes, or more so, the lack of them. Furi kinda does this thing where it starts difficult and ramps it up marginally over the course of the playthrough, but after the initial fights, I didn't find any of the bosses to be that difficult. However, I would say that this is not a huge issue, because the bosses felt different enough to warrant the lack of any difficulty spike. It's more so of a minor complaint from my end, and it should absolutely not deter anybody from playing this game. Looking past these problems though, I also found there to be a few technical issues with this game. Some of the walking segments bugged out for me, and when this happened, it really sucked, as it dragged me entirely out of the experience. It's so unfortunate that these issues never got resolved, as their presence ruined one or two great moments of this game for me, which absolutely blows. Luckily though, the game worked perfectly most of the time, which definitely allowed me to leave this title on a positive note. When looking back at my time with Furi, I get the feeling that the game achieved everything it was trying to do. I didn't expect this game to be a favorite of mine, and this is still mostly true. However, the game did still far and away exceed many of my expectations for it. I somewhat expected Furi to fill the role of the video game equivalent of junk food, and I can safely say that this is not the case. I would recommend this game to anybody who asked. So, with Furi out of the way, I've taken another game off the chopping block, but we all know that games get added to the backlog a lot faster than they get removed. With this in mind, I would like to acknowledge that I'm in some seriously deep shit. In the future, if I decide to review any other game off my backlog, it will have that chopping block stamp on the thumbnail. But for now, I'm going to retire it for a little bit and just let that list marinate. I appreciate you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.